Steve, why don't you take a few and then...
So now only like popular vote. We got at least two that sound similar here. So Charles Ostman asked, directed to Ray, but I guess any singularitarian can take this if it rings a bell. Do you see a potential correlation between what is often referred to as the end times, as per ancient prophecy, and the singularity?
No.
No. Now, is that the Mayan thing or the rapture thing? I'm not sure what...
The science fiction writer Ken MacLeod talks about the singularity as the rapture of the nerds.
Now is the time when the nerds of Silicon Valley rise up from their hobbit holes to trouble the councils of the wise.
Well, I think that for all of us, speculation about technology and where it might go in the future, and particularly for science fiction writers, but for all of us, reflects our anxieties and hopes about the present. Mary Shelley wasn't trying to engage in scientific speculation about when the era of the golem will arrive. She was talking about an increasingly mechanized society that she inhabited at the moment. And, you know, I think this goes to the first question. When will we have strong AI? Well, we've had it as a really useful literary device for a good 70 years. And I think it, you know, we've attained it, and it's here and it walks among us. I think that we are wired to think about transcendence as something that might solve a lot of our problems, for good and bad. And that there are a number of us for whom the attractiveness of the idea of the singularity bears at least some relationship to the attractiveness of the idea of the rapture as something that might come. It is a Götterdämmerung. It's an end to the problems we have now, although maybe an ushering in of some new ones. And it's a way of wiping the slate clean. So psychologically, why is the idea of singularity attractive? Is it related to the rapture? Of course.
Well, Max Moore points out that the world's philosophies and religions emerged in pre-scientific times, and I think there was a great desire to overcome the unbearable burdens that life brought upon us, and so people just used their imaginations to imagine a rapture and a transcendence. But now we've actually had science and other forms of knowledge, all of which are forms of transcendence. I mean, music is a bunch of notes and rests, and it's a bunch of sounds, but it transcends, goes beyond just a bunch of sounds. It creates an emotional reaction. All art does that, literature does that. Science and engineering and technology do that. You put a bunch of parts and you put them in a certain order and it does nothing, but you put them in a different order and suddenly it can cure disease or relieve a disability or create some kind of transcendence. And the idea of singularity doesn't emerge just from our anxiety. It emerges from this idea that we can apply our knowledge to actually solve problems, and then noticing that our tools are getting more and more powerful, and we can use our tools to create more powerful tools and have the reach to transcend our problems in a real way rather than just with these imaginary forms of transcendence.
Sure, but consciousness uploading isn't a problem. It's an aspiration. And the reason that we aspire to consciousness uploading, or the reason that we aspire to all those other transcendent elements that constitute parts of the singularity belief system, is related to the reason that we aspire to the rapture.
Well, the reason that people aspired to fly when they imagined angels and told the story of Icarus is certainly related to the desire that drove the Wright brothers to build the first flying machine. The best short definition of rationality that I've ever heard is, let's see, it was in a book, I'm trying to remember who said this, but the book was called Seeker's Mask, and the sentence was, that which can be destroyed by the truth should be. Now, it's certainly true that you can have aspirations that are beyond your grasp, and lies can rise up which promise to feed these aspirations. If you have no medical cure, you will buy snake oil. But that doesn't cast a shadow on the aspirations themselves. Or another saying is, the world's stupidest man can say the sun is shining, but that doesn't make it dark out. You can't look at previous mistakes and get predictions about the physical universe from that. If you want to predict the real future, you've got to use knowledge about the universe to do that, not look at other people's mistakes.
If there's a theme that characterizes many of the talks that we've heard today, though, it's about whether or not AI will be, or singularity will be disaster or or great future, and I think that that reflects a similar impetus to the one that drives rapture or non-rapture. I think the split to divide the world on, perhaps, isn't whether or not you believe in the singularity or not in the singularity. It's whether you believe that the future will be good or the future will be terrible.
If someone comes to you with an attempt to make a rational scientific prediction, to use models and the knowledge of the universe that they have, you can't say, well, that can't be right even in principle because it's similar to this other prediction that I think is wrong.
Well, no, but we can build an infinitude of Rube Goldberg machines, and yet we choose not to do so. Why are we so confident that when we have in hand the ability to build a Rube Goldberg machine that will let us upload our consciousness, we will? I think the answer is because we aspire to transcendence.
Well, that's a perfectly correct inference. If everyone wants it and they have the ability, then they'll take it.
Just add an observation for you. I kind of agree with both of you. I don't think you're really actually...
I'm not sure we're disagreeing.
No, I'm not sure you are. But I think a further point about that is I think there's different kinds of yearnings going on here. You're saying it's related to the same yearning, but I think there's actually more than one, and there probably is in the traditional religious case too. I think there's kind of a yearning of transcendence in the sense, for some people, of a purely passive yearning, where once the rapture happens, you go up to this wonderful place and you just kick back and kind of be in bliss all the time. That'd be very much like someone who looked forward to the Singularity so they could plug into a VR machine and have a perpetual orgasm or something like that. So that's one kind, and I don't think many people here fall into that category. I think another kind is the yearning for transcendence in the sense of this will give me the ability to improve myself yet further and have richer, deeper experiences and to improve the world further. And that's a very different kind of thing. That would be more, you don't see that reflected much in the religious version, except that there are some versions, I guess, especially in Mormonism, as I understand it, where there are progressive levels and presumably you have to earn your way up there. But largely it's a very passive view, whereas what we're talking about here clearly requires effort and input to shape it the right way and to make it good. It's not either good or bad.
Where does building a Dyson sphere fit on the improving the world's scale? Is dissembling the world and turning it into along with all the other planets in the system and turning it into a giant sphere around the sun constitute an improvement or not?
I think Earth should be kept as a national park, but the other stars we can do that.
Let me go to another question from the audience that actually follows up on the point you just raised, which is sort of the practical question of the human agency in all of this. And a question from Lucas Van Laden. What kinds of skills will be needed in the next 10 to 20 years, and how can one keep one's skills relevant and marketable in such a rapidly changing world?
I think we really have a world now where whatever you have a passion for, you're making a contribution to this, because expanding knowledge is what's critical. And if you can make a contribution that if you build it, people will come if it has merit, whether it's a music or a play or a movie or a piece of software or some new virtual reality creation or a new video game. And so, people find their passion at some point, or maybe not. But the idea of learning a trade that you're going to keep for your whole lifetime, I think, has been dead for a while. The idea of getting an education at one point in your time and then you're going to go and just deploy it, I think, is dying as well. Creating knowledge is hard. It requires passion. It requires really putting that first and going with your passion. The tools to enable that now are really quite democratized, as I mentioned before. People really can create music and movies and software. They don't have to go to this big institution, the big corporation that controls the computer and the recording studio. And so really you have a personal issue of finding your passion and how you can contribute to this world of knowledge that is expanding. And that, to me, that is the grand mission of human civilization and what is unique about us. Bonobos didn't quite get there.
I think the ability to type Alt or Control W very quickly after making the assessment that everything in the window is something you don't need to see. I think the number of windows that have things we might need to see that will hover in front of us is going to exceed the number of windows that we could possibly give due attention to, if it hasn't already. And being able to hit that close box very quickly, I think, is going, and accurately, and not to say that you hit the X accurately, but rather that you only hit the X on the windows that you should be hitting, is probably going to be one of the more important skills. I mean, I think the universe of things that I know exist and that I know how to find and that are one click away and that I want to click on is larger than the universe of things that I will click on between now and the day I die should I live a non-enhanced human lifespan.
Whatever career you pick, send us an email and we'll be sure that that field is one of the first ones we automate out of existence.
Bruce Sterling says that if you can describe what you do for a living, it's already been outsourced.
I would add to that, just paying attention to planetary trends and accelerating change and asking how do they, what do they mean to your own life? I mean, if corporations are continually involved in lifelong learning, then that's what you need to be doing, There's a reason Google's market cap is half of Microsoft's now. It's not an accident. There's a reason. And, understanding that, putting your money into technologies that are creating massive collective network value, being digital, you go to Fry's every year, your computers are going to be twice as powerful, the options that you can buy. So are you digital now? Are you using them? Are you making sure everyone in your network is digital? Are you guys all on eyesight? Are you all connected? Are you all virtual yet? And I think adding all of those things are a complement to Ray's point of finding your individual passion and how can you individually contribute to that global system. And I think those two balance each other.
Any other thoughts from anybody else?
I might actually, if I may, I mean, it's something I sympathize with looking at all the business plans we get each year and all the entrepreneurs and all the rate of change. It's only accelerating. The importance of technological literacy grows with each year. The difficulty of being interdisciplinary in the face of a renaissance is daunting. It means going back to school. It means learning again.
Speak up, Steve. I can hardly hear you.
Oh, I was going to say, the fundamental thing I want to emphasize is it's important to go back to school, to live a life of lifelong learning, because we're in the middle of a renaissance that is interdisciplinary. It's a cross-pollination of life sciences and information technology. There's a renaissance going on in the biological sciences that is really welcoming and embracing a lot of information theorists and others to enter that field. So I would encourage folks to just think about the biological sciences writ large and complexity theory, principles of emergence. These are, barely describable as theories today, but are going to be really important going forward. So, I know you're going to see a lot of emphasis on design and purposeful approaches, but a lot of the computer scientists are, in a sense, covering that landscape. And I think the big unexploited domain is in understanding the power of the information systems of biology.
Just a very brief addendum to both what you said and what Corey said, because they're kind of in conflict. You're saying be interdisciplinary and sort of opening a wider field, and Corey's saying you've got to better shut the windows. Both are correct, of course. And I think apart from knowing how to shut the windows quickly, as you said, I think it's an important skill to develop. In accordance with what you're saying, is know how to open new windows and which ones to open and take a peek at, and how long you should be peeking before you decide to move on to the next. Because it really is important to keep learning new skills and stretch yourselves in new directions, but you could spend all your time just kind of being a dilettante like that. So you really have to sort of figure out, well, given what I want to do and what I learn as I go along, which one should I pursue further and which one not? Because you can't avoid some experimentation, but you don't want too much.
If you are interested in science and technology, then getting a strong math background, I think, is the best thing you can do. It's really the universal language of science and technology. It's a very powerful field. I think it's a very sexy field. It's remarkable what you can describe in mathematical terms, and ultimately we'll understand these different processes we're talking about in mathematical terms.
Quick, ask another question before someone keeps answering this one.
Shoot. Well, actually one for Corey. For the benefit of maybe folks in the audience, I know that there's a pretty tight coupling between your talk and the other talks, but it may have been lost. And I just wanted to let you maybe expound on why what you spoke about is so critically important for the future of biological systems, nanotechnology. When matter becomes code, how code is regulated could spoil this whole party, if you will. And I co-taught a class with Larry Lessig based on that whole premise. How will the future migrate? Will it be from the domain of property protection of ideas in the old, or will it allow for innovation from the new? And how can we break the sort of fundamental flaws in a political system that don't allow the new to overtake the old?
Well, I think that critically the problem is that we're trying to apply a set of rules that have had some success in creating good outcomes in certain kinds of industrial activity to activities that don't bear much resemblance to them, and we're driving in nails with a screwdriver. Copyright had some success at doing what it was supposed to do, which was changing the world from a patronage world to an industrial world. where it used to be you could only make art if the Pope said that it sounded like a good idea or if a king did, and that was great for producing the occasional nice ceiling, but it centralized decision-making about culture. And so copyright, by creating exclusive rights, created an industrial practice of culture, and that was good, provided you were a record company and the other people involved were record companies and everyone talking to each other were record companies, and they could hire lawyers to deal with it. What copyright is completely ineffective at is helping average individuals mediate their interactions with one another or with artists. It fails completely when you say, okay, well, this copyright system that we would use to sue pirates who produce bootleg editions of a book and sell them on a blanket, we'll now use to sue tens of thousands of music fans. You can eliminate people who sell books from blankets to some extent by suing them. You can't eliminate music fans, nor should you want to. So now we're moving that system even further. We're moving it into all kinds of knowledge goods, and all goods are becoming knowledge goods. So we're starting to say, well, why can't we copyright things like the interface to an automobile? Why can't we copyright things like the interface to a garage door opener or the interface to a printer cartridge? Why can't we patent certain mathematical formulas? You know, Ray, in your book, you talk about how the number of patents that have been filed has increased, and that's in some metric a way of showing you that knowledge has increased. But the inverse of that is that the more patents we've filed, the more knowledge we've locked away, and more importantly, the more knowledge we've turned into legal quagmire. You know, where if it's a semiconductor patent, you might spend $1 billion on it.
Let me comment on that. I mean, sounded like you were objecting to digital rights management. I mean, you own this device. Why should it tell you what you can do with it? But the software products that you use on it, you don't necessarily own. You license. And I don't think you're arguing for completely free information. And we do have the shareware open source movement. I think there will be open source versions of everything, including all the products that Eric's device that he described will be able to manufacture. But we do need to protect the business models that support the creation of these intellectual products, or we won't have the business models to create them.
Well, I think you just put your finger on it, though, when you talked about how you don't own this stuff, it's a license. And that, I think, more than anything, is the biggest change that we're undergoing. We're moving from a world where the stuff that you use, your tools, like your word processor, which is the kind of 21st century equivalent of your typewriter, aren't things that you own. And there's a gigantic difference between living in a house full of things that you own and inhabiting a workspace full of things that you own and a workspace where things are
you own the word
licensed.
processor, and you own and they're open source versions of word processors and lots of things, including encyclopedias and all kinds of things which we used to pay for. But I mean, wouldn't you support kind of the open commons concept where a creator of a piece of intellectual property can say, okay, I want everybody to be able to use this, or I want everybody to be able to use this, but if they use it for more than 100 hours, then they should send me a dime? Or shouldn't they have the right to be able to describe the business model that they want to pursue? And if everything is going to become intellectual products, and we are moving gradually towards that, we do want to protect the business models that allow for the capital formation to create these intellectual properties that may cost millions of dollars to create.
So I actually, I think that you're right. The important thing to keep our eye on the prize here with is the works themselves, right? It's these outcomes, right? We want more encyclopedias, more word processors, better technology, better infrastructure, and some of that stuff is really expensive, and one way to ensure that people will invest in expensive stuff is to give them exclusive rights. But sometimes it has a paradoxical effect of discouraging investment because it discourages incumbent or new entrants to the market. So in Europe, if you create a database of non-original facts, like a search engine, you get a 50-year monopoly over the content of that database of non-original facts. Databases are expensive to produce, right? Phone books cost a lot of money to make. Other factual databases cost a lot of money to make. And you think that by granting this 50-year monopoly, you would incentivize more production. Now, here in America, we don't have that exclusive right. In the 25 years since Europe has instituted this exclusive right over databases, there's been a 25-fold growth in database industry in America, where there is no such exclusive right. In Europe, there's been essentially no growth in databases, and where there's been marginal growth, it's been through the acquisition of American companies operating in regions where there are no such exclusive rights. So you're right, we should assign exclusive rights where it's likely that that will incentivize more investment than no exclusive rights. But the presumption about the creation of a new monopoly should always be that until it's proven innocent, it's guilty, that a monopoly will discourage competition, not create it.
Then they're stupid to lock up. They're stupid to lock up their databases because no one's going to buy them. Someone else can create a different database with those public facts and maybe make it available and use a Google-like model.
Yeah, although, you know, in some European nations, the way they've implemented this directive, even an original recreation of such a database is unlawful. It's a gold rush, right? Just like with software patents, where sometimes the first person to send off to the patent office and not the first person to invent it gets a monopoly and gets the ability to sue or intimidate their competitors for a very long time. You know, here in the US, there's a company called Acacia Multimedia that claims to have invented streaming media in the mid-90s or so. Long after streaming media was invented, but if you want to do streaming media, you have to contend with the fact that they might show up and try to sue you, and God help you if you want to make a RIM.
There's a very dark science fiction story about a alien species that valued their genes so highly and could actually track which genes were being passed around, that all the good genes got priced so high that very few families could afford them, and they copyrighted themselves out of existence.
That was the segue I was looking for.
Jim Hughes' Citizen Cyborg addresses some of this stuff, where he talks about a kind of liberal democratic response to the digital divide, where he says, you know, there are lots of divides that we encounter in the real world. There's divides in terms of access to medical care or education and so on. And the normal liberal democratic response to this is to say, well, we should find some way to socialize some of those costs for people who are otherwise disadvantaged. Let's create scholarships, let's create Medicare and so on. And it's only when it comes to kind of transcendent technology, the ability to improve yourself using technology, that we see a kind of liberal democratic drawing back, where they say, well, we should not allow people to modify their germlines or to augment their intelligence, because that will widen the gap between the rich and the poor so much that that'll never be surmounted. And Jim, who's great, James Hughes, argues that we can bridge this, in fact, by socializing some of the elements of this, by saying to some people who otherwise wouldn't have access to life-enhancing technologies, that we've come up with either charitable or governmental or some combination of solutions to make that more widely available.
I have sort of a question. You know, regardless of whether we have a more socialist or less socialist path in the 21st century as things develop,
I don't think anyone was talking about socialism.
Even if you're not, you know, even if you're not too optimistic, you think there are a lot of risks with this sort of technology, like Bill and some other people here have alluded to. I don't see what stops it at any point. And if you just think about the health benefits of you know, again, not necessarily being immortal, but, you know, being able to cure this particular disease that you have, I think it's asking too much to tell people that they can't do that. And you're not allowed to do that. And that you can, and you know, at every single point, I think people are just going to chip away and say, no, we want this, we want this, we want this. It's going to be very hard to stop. And I don't see how you do it without having a worldwide totalitarian state.
I think it's trivial to stop it. You do things like make limited partners and investment firms liable for infringements on technology laws.
You do that worldwide?
Yeah, sure. You do it with a WIPO treaty. So like you say to people who invest in Napster that the insurance companies that back the investor will be on the hook if it turns out that what Napster is doing illegal, and anything that requires a lot of capital vanishes.
Are you going to get the Chinese government to do that?
Well, the Chinese government has its own impetuses, but there's a thing called the TRIPS that was attached to the WTO that says that anyone that doesn't apply comparable regimes to the regime set out in the TRIPS can't export their soybeans, can't export their steel, can find themselves in front of a World Trade Court. So yeah, increasingly we're seeing lots of countries doing this. America was free to spend 100 years as a pirate nation, not honoring foreign copyrights and patents. But if sub-Saharan Africa wants to say, you know what, $1 a dose AIDS cocktails are where it's at because the cost of honoring foreign patent rights is much higher than the cost of ensuring that our population survives, suddenly they'll find themselves wiped out. So yeah, I think that as a global matter, it's very plausible. I think it's really dangerous to rely on there being some kind of global cyber data haven that will find it, a Switzerland for technology regulations that will make itself rich by ignoring the rest of the world's rules. We have to solve these problems in every country.
I think another really big issue with this intellectual property and the direction it's going is to realize that it's actually right now moving in the opposite direction of what this kind of global network society that we're creating. Individuals are being empowered in ways they never were empowered before. But what's happening with IP and copyright is they're getting longer, and the system is becoming more restrictive, and it's moving. It's basically, in the short run, it's kind of a last-ditch attempt, I think, of these kind of powerful plutocratic actors to say, okay, I'm going to get mine as much as I can. And I think the pendulum is going to go the other way, and I think it's going to because of articulate folks like Dr. O and Lessig, and when you look at IP reform right now, you realize that patent time that we have should be going down as the velocity of the economy goes up. The time that you should have, sure, you can patent a life form, but for like 9 years, and it's going to be 8 years, 10 years further, into the future. And if you realize that, and you say, okay, we've got to just make the system more democratic. I think we can make those small steps. And Beth Novak, if you've ever read her pieces on the web, she's got some wonderful ideas for kind of stepwise reorganization of these systems.
Yeah, it's not all or nothing.
Does everyone else on the panel agree that we need a worldwide government effectively to control or modify this technology?
I think I'll be violently neutral on that one.
I don't think it doesn't fit with. It's not a systems compliant model. I think to believe that we're going to have a world government. I think we're going to have a world governance, and that'll probably be 80% of the planet will participate in those kinds of networks. But I think there's still going to be Afghanistan, the Taliban. There's still going to be the Luddites, the Amish. There's going to be these little areas that don't want to participate because that's how diversity is the fundamental of life. But I think those areas are going to be, to use Ellie's term, they're going to be earth parks. They're going to be carefully monitoring those and making sure that they don't do things that mess us up.
The Luddites can have their own Dyson sphere.
They can say enough. They're free to say enough.
I wasn't sure who that question was addressed to.
Let me give you one scenario for a bigger picture. Picture 2040 when you've got digital twins out there you're talking to in a simplistic language. They're not really AIs yet, but they can do pretty smart things for you, set schedules, etc. Some powerful plutocratic actor does something you don't like. You can tell your DT to boycott that until XYZ NGOs conditions are satisfied. There's going to be huge power that we're going to have through our electronic extensions in that kind of a world. And it's not a full AI world. It's a partial AI world with these basically network powers that we're having. And so I think the pendulum is going to go the other direction. And I think it really right now is kind of a last-ditch attempt to...
I think that it's useful to, when you consider a new technology, ask, does this technology increase the power of the powerful over the powerless, or does it help the powerless keep an eye on the powerful? One technology that I'm very worried about is brain scanning based lie detectors, which certainly has all kinds of imaginable wonderful uses, but somehow I worry that in the end it's going to be used on people who are accused of downloading music rather than on politicians to see if they really mean their campaign promises.
My concern is that we're just seeing the front edge of the wave with NSA wiretapping, something that, by the way, EFF is involved in suing AT&T over, the long-range the long-range trajectory of that is a kind of series of punctuated privacy breaches that are comparable to the ones that happened when the Usenet archive went online. And I think this audience probably has some sympathy with this, that 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we all assumed that Usenet posts were books written on water, and we said things that we never thought would come back to revisit us. And 15 years later, it's all up on Google, and it comes back and bites us on the ass in many instances. Well, I think that we're going to see a punctuated series of these where we see things like every photo on the internet compared to facial recognition software. The photos that are being taken now will be analyzed later. I think we'll see things like Bayesian analysis of all the text posted on the internet or support vector or some other text analysis to try and make determinations about its author. So text that is presently anonymous becomes anonymous later. Where we'll see things like wiretappers, private and public, with software-defined radios capturing big chunks of the RF spectrum, particularly the mobile phone spectrum, just capturing all of it at certain intersections, and then 10 years down the line turning that, cracking to crypto, and 12 years after that, or 2 years after that, doing text-to-speech or speech-to-text, and then a couple of years after that doing something else to figure out who's doing what. And in 20 years, someone comes up to you and says, were you at the corner of, Market and Powell in 1999 talking about doing something naughty? That's I think, the kind of long-term totalitarian risk from this stuff.
I think that one technology that can increase the power of the powerless over the powerful is collaborative filtering, and to a lesser extent what's now called Web 2.0, because part of the main reason that the aristocracies, the various aristocracies can get away with what they do is because you don't have attention to pay to everyone who's trying to pick your pocket. And if there was some way, for example, that as soon as 100 people dig some particularly egregious act of legislation, and hopefully even automatically I could set it up so that I get a little ping notification, don't vote for this person the next time I'm at the polling booth, then by multiplying our attention, it can enable us to keep an eye on all the many people who are simultaneously picking everyone's pocket for a penny to make millions of dollars themselves.
Let me second Ellie's point. We don't realize how powerful the network already is. GBN did a study last year that said that all the money that foreign guest workers send back to Latin America, all those people who are outside of Latin America, plus all the NGO money, that money together is now heavier than all the money, all the foreign direct investment from corporations and all government aid to Latin America. And that kind of money, that remittance money is actually 5 times heavier for basket case countries like Haiti. So the network, we're not even in a world of micropayments yet, and the network is already vastly outcompeting the economic power of the individual actors. And I think we're going to recognize our power over the coming decades. I think that's going to be a big story that's a positive.
Well, I want to, we've hit the 5 p.m.
Questions from the floor?
Should we take a few questions from the floor as
Yeah,
well?
absolutely. We've got time.
Okay, we have time for a few more questions. Why don't we just, should we have people?
Yeah, we got people with mics, so
Do we?
volunteers with mics.
Go ahead and
There's some mics coming down. There's someone here.
take a few questions from the floor.
Oh, Brad. Get Brad Templeton. He's always a ham. This will wake everyone up.
About 15 to 20 minutes.
Oh. Oh. Oh, give it to Brad.
Bill, can you hear me? I'm not sure if I'm being received remotely.
I can. Yeah.
This is a question more for, I guess, Bill and Nick to some extent. Clearly, Ray, you named your first book The Age of Spiritual, or one of your first books, The Age of Spiritual Machines, and we've seen that there are eschatological dimensions to the singularity, spiritual and religious dimensions to the singularity about, is this even a good direction for humanity to go in? What is the ultimate outcome of life in the universe? My question for everybody is there high-quality ongoing work being done in the religious studies of the singularity, which seems to me to be a dimension of the discourse that's going to become very, very relevant as this meme spreads out into the wider culture?
I sure hope not.
I understand. I know there's a lot of a-religious people on the panel, so I know this may or may not be relevant to some panelists, but to those who it is relevant, any contributions?
Well, I think absolutely. You look at Templeton Foundation, they're probably leading right now in that whole space of the convergence of science and spirituality. Just Google Templeton Foundation and look at their conferences. And I think they're already doing a lot. They have the largest...
I can't understand you. Could you speak louder?
Sorry.
I can't understand.
So the kind of a convergence of science and spirituality. that's happening in groups like the Templeton Foundation, and they're already dealing with these issues of accelerating change. And I'm very hopeful that that's going to continue.
I think it's there's a lot of very interesting and odd sort of thinking that's been going on in this field. In Enough, I talked about one of the things that Gregory Stock describes, the hope that people will, and I think this sort of illustrates the category mistake that we're capable of making. Talks about how it may well be possible to do genetic modification of people to make them more pious. Now that we've identified those regions of the brain that are most that light up during prayer or whatever else. And there have been other people at MIT and elsewhere who've done a lot of work, done a lot of at least writing about how great it'll be to create spiritual robots, and pointing out how much more quickly they can pray and things like that. The category mistake, I guess, I think is pretty obvious here, and it's taking something that's a deep part of the human experience, and somehow confusing quality with quantity. The mistake I think that we make a great deal of the time about many of these things. And in the end, I think that the spiritual degree, there is a kind of spiritual response to these questions. The spiritual response is going to have a great deal to do with bringing to the fore this notion that there's something important about human self-restraint, that there's something important about human mortality. And I think that'll be I think if it happens, it'll be a very interesting process, and I don't think it'll be entirely or even mostly collaborative. I think it'll be, as Ray may have indicated with his answer, to a certain amount in conflict. And I think that that's an important, necessary conflict, because I think it points out an awful lot of the philosophical poverty of this, of what we've thought so far about these questions.
Max Moore pointed out that most religions emerged in pre-scientific times, but people who are religious are not necessarily unscientific. I mean, there are many religious scientists, and these are not necessarily inconsistent. I think it's a question of what we consider religion to be about and what its ultimate values are. Jesus said, the meek shall inherit the earth, and I think there's a lot about this technology that empowers people who have ideas, who are just lone individuals, who are meek, but who have something to say, who now can be heard. We can harness the wisdom of crowds at more of a deep wisdom level, rather than just the idea of a crowd as a mob. And so I think this technology can empower us on the positive side. One of the values we get from religion is the golden rule, do unto others. And I think we can see both the promise and the peril. We talked about some of the dangers of over-control of information, but at the same time, these social networks and blogs are very democratizing. So I think some of the true values of religion, such as the golden rule, we should keep in mind. And the story of the 21st century hasn't been written. These are very powerful technologies, and they do have both promise and peril at every level. And I do think we have to guide it in a wise direction. And there is still some wisdom in these religions to guide us.
Our culture has a strong taboo against criticizing other people's religious beliefs, but I'll come out and say that people who think that some of their beliefs ought to be immune from criticism scare me. I think that religion and the singularity is an explosive mix, and I'd rather not see it set off.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the purposes of religion has been to rationalize death as a good thing. I mean, I think death is a tragedy. It's a profound loss of community. It's a profound loss of love and relationship and knowledge. You know, even if the person is, you know, well into their 80s and 90s. And so with having had no alternative, we've rationalized that, oh, that's really a good thing. It's really empowering.
And people make those kind of mistakes. They see horrible things, they rationalize them. Even scientists make those kind of mistakes. But once it's been rationalized into a scripture, you can't criticize it anymore. You can't move forward. You're stuck at the intellectual level of whoever wrote it down. And so I don't think it's just a religious mistake to rationalize death as a good thing. Certainly a lot of secular philosophers have rationalized death as a good thing. But I think the difference is that in one case, it's easier to recover from your mistake if you don't feel that your beliefs about it ought to be immune to criticism.
I mean, that's one of the downsides of religion, is intolerance.
Just a very brief comment, because directly to answer the question. In my experience, I've given talks at Jewish high schools on life extension and physical immortality and some of these other issues. And talked to quite a few people, and I've taught philosophy of religion. So I've thought about it quite a bit. And it seems, in my experience, well, pretty clearly, fundamentalists of any religion tend to be rather anti-singularity, anti-transhumanist, and so on. Catholics, I've spoken to a lot of young Catholics, and they tend to not really have any clear view about it, just find it kind of confusing and interesting at the same time. But younger Catholics seem more open to parts of the idea than the older ones, certainly. Partly because they hold this contradictory view that, yes, the Pope is the Pope, and so presumably he's infallible, but I disagree with them about wearing condoms. So they manage to hold these ideas in their mind at the same time. I think the people who are most sympathetic tend to be Jews. Judaism seems to not have any real problems with transhumanist goals, except for one person, Leon Kass, who's very upset about other Jews not being strongly against it, and has written an essay specifically on that. But in general, I guess because there's no strong view of an afterlife, and it's all very much sort of self-reliance, doesn't have much of a problem with these ideas.
You know, if I can just add one more thing, I think it's really significant to note and that where we came out here, sort of as we ended the day, was with this question of death and whether or not it's a good thing. And it returns to this, to my observation I tried to make during my talk, that I think that this, as with many fundamentalisms, a kind of fundamentalist belief in technological progress is an attempt to try to evade this question of death. I think that there have been a lot of other more mature attempts, some of them religious and some other, to figure out what the meaning of our mortality in our lives is. In fact, I think that's where an awful lot of what we call great art and great music, and an awful lot of what we call our sort of deepest development as human beings, our ability to love each other, that's where it derived from. And so I think that I think that we run enormous risk in glibly dismissing the idea that there might be some value in the idea that humans are a mortal species. And I think it's really important to keep that somewhere near the front of our minds. I've never met anybody who's said that weblogs were a bad idea. I mean, or social openness or whatever else. But I think that we're treading on very different ground when we move elide easily from having weblogs to living forever.
Okay. First of all, Ray, the Bible, when it says the meek will inherit the earth, it also says there's a 1,000-year probate. So that doesn't.
Sorry, I missed that.
But can you hear me, Bill? Your speech on the eloquent speech on the joys of the natural mortal life and the ability to see your children replace you was very moving. And your willingness to lay down your life for your children is very impressive. But your willingness to lay down my life for my children is less impressive. And so I want you to address the question of what your argument for relinquishment of, for example, of anti-aging or long life technologies in search of this goal means when you apply it to other people. And then I want the rest of the panel, the singularitarians, or however many syllables there are in that word, Ray, for those people to ask the question of if you think there's a 10% chance, as you said, Ray, that this ends horribly, what is our right to lay down everyone else's life on that 10% chance? So we're both playing risks with what will happen to the lives of other people. And what do you feel are the moral implications of that?
Well, I will say for myself, since you asked me, that as you can tell, I'm not a libertarian. I think that if we come as a democracy to these questions, as a community of people in this country and around the world, and make a set of decisions that we want to do is go forward towards immortality, well, then that's our right and ability to do that. But I want to have that discussion, and I want to have it as a community, because it affects community. The idea of what a human being is and what a human community is, I think, can't survive these kind of technologies, at least at their most extreme. And that's precisely the reason that I think you shouldn't be allowed to engineer your child or whatever else. I would, just going forward on that it's always struck me as odd that libertarians embrace technology like germline genetic manipulation that arguably exerts more control over another human being than any dictator ever tried to impose in the most totalitarian society.
I don't think the discussion would go along these lines. The discussion is not should we have radical life extension. The discussion is should we cure cancer, should we overcome diabetes, should we cure this kidney disease. And through these incremental steps, we get from here to there. And of course there is strong support for each of these incremental steps. There's a strong rooted belief in this kind of technological progress, and my thesis is the end result of all of this activity, again, addressing all these different diseases and other issues with biology is going to give us greater and greater ability to reprogram our biology, and we're gaining those tools. So it's not a matter should we have radical life extension as if that's a simple selection. This technology, just like that discussion we had with strong AI, is on a very broad front with thousands of academic institutions and corporations and government research approaching medical and biotechnology, nanotechnology, AI, in tens of thousands of efforts.
I believe it was Samantha Atkins who said, and I apologize to her if I'm quoting her incorrectly, that death does not give meaning to life. Life gives meaning to life. That our ability to love, to be happy, to solve difficult challenges, to reach out and touch one another does not become less meaningful if we lose the ability to turn into dirt that cannot do any of those things.
Yeah, I was just going to sort of say something to follow up Ray's comments, which is that although you might be right that a lot of this will happen anyway in time as a result of incremental progress, it can matter a lot when exactly it happens, especially with something like life extension or solving the aging problem. Even a single year, even a single month, or a single day's delay or acceleration with regard to that is equivalent, a single day in the case of aging, to 100,000 people dying. So that's this room multiplied by 100 or so. And right now, it's plausible that because the focus is on pretty much exclusively on solving, making incremental progress, solving particular problems on cancer, on heart disease, on Alzheimer's, on a lot of specific diseases or a lot of specific symptoms of the aging process, as opposed to tackling the underlying problem behind all of these specific symptoms, which is the aging process itself, that progress might be slower than it otherwise could be. towards finally getting rid of aging. So, I mean, I don't think you would disagree with that.
That's a complex discussion, but you can describe about 12 different processes underlying aging. They're all strongly related to diseases. We actually are working on the aging problem, even if nobody says they are. Aubrey de Grey had, for example, described 7 of those. He says there are 7, I think there are a few more, and has a strategy for doing bioengineering to address them all. But all those areas are actually being pursued quite aggressively because they're all very closely related to the issues of cell senescence and cancer and so on. And so without getting into the technical details, we are actually working, we collectively, the scientific community, are working on the issue of aging.
Certainly, and some people would also describe themselves as working on the problem. But it's the same with nanotechnology, that eventually you'll probably get there even without any guiding vision of what you want to achieve at the end. But sometimes if you actually know exactly what you're trying to do, and you approach it in a more engineering fashion with figuring out which steps exactly do we need to take in order to get there, you might get the result faster. And so my simple point here is that faster or slower, even in the extreme case where this would only make a difference of a day, is still a tragedy of a scale that is greater than could fit into one human's comprehension. And if the delay is on the scale of a year, or 2 years, or 10 years, then it's so much worse. So
this actually relates to what Max said about the precautionary principle, which is actually how, for example, the FDA works. They absolutely don't want any attributable risk. They don't want one kid to die in gene therapy trials, and then his mother is on CNN, and then there are congressional investigations, and that actually happened. But there's no fallout from their delaying this research and approvals of various things. You can show delay of gene therapy trials has unattributable consequences of hundreds of thousands of people dying, as per your point, through this kind of delay process. And very, very rarely is there any kind of uproar that things have been delayed.
Let's take one more question from the audience.
Ron Lockman. Testing. Ron Lockman. Here we are at Stanford, and both I think that the strength and weakness of this conference is the number of levels that we're actually talking about. Bill and Corey, I think, have done a very good job bringing up topics that are, say, public policy. But we have a topic here about AGI and when it's going to be here. And it would be really helpful if you gave us tasks that you want us to work on for the next 10 or 20 years within specific fields. You know, Steve, why don't you ask more of us to work on AGI? I would suggest there are only 200 folks in the world really working on AGI from it being a very popular topic 10 or 20 years ago. Bill and Corey, I think you are specifically asking us to do things regarding public policy. And frankly, I don't think Bill is at least talking to me about singularity. Bill is talking to me about public policy and sustainability and about growth of human species and politics and how we all coordinate or don't, but not about singularity. I mean, Google is a good thing. You know, we have enhanced human intelligence with Google. Bill isn't telling me that Google is bad. Bill is somehow suggesting that AGI or singularity is bad. Well, please, for each of your talks, summarize to each of us a question, something you want some of us to work on in the center of what your talk is about.
Christine, you want to start?
Well, I think I tried to do that in my talk. I talked about the importance of secure computing systems and the fact that in the future the world is increasingly going to be run by software. Our software is insecure. That's a serious problem. I know a lot of you have computer backgrounds. How many of you have computer backgrounds? I know a lot of you have computer backgrounds. Now I want you to put your hands down. Now over here is Mark Miller, and I want you to put your hand up. He is working on the secure computing programs. There are other people here, so Afterwards, I want you all to go over there and help Mark implement secure computing.
If I can answer next, I think that it's actually surprisingly hard to make progress on AGI, as a lot of AI researchers have discovered. It would be, if you actually want to make a serious difference there, it would be a lifelong project. It's very hard for me to imagine something that you can do on a volunteer basis that makes a serious difference. It would be like, I don't know, trying to walk into a cancer research lab and making a breakthrough, but then I don't actually know if the cancer research labs would like people walking in and helping. But I do know that it's artificial general intelligence, my apologies. And I do think that the main thing I would say is, right now the main thing we need is more public funding to have specialists who can think about these problems and nothing else and work on them full time. By public funding, I mean funding from the public, not necessarily from the government. But in terms of what if you do want to spend your whole life on it, to make a difference in AGI, you study every cognitive science under the sun. And good places to start are with neuroanatomy, evolutionary psychology, and Bayesian probability and decision theory. But mainly, it is pretty hard to do this on a volunteer basis. There's the old paradox of the lawyer who would rather work at a soup sorry? Mike.
$1 billion in companies, okay? Just give us problems we can spend $10 million on, let's say. Christine says secure operating systems, great. $10 million, oh, roughly 8 lifetimes worth of work. Specific things that small groups can do good work on. We'll do secure operating systems.
Okay, understand reflectivity. I think that we don't have a good understanding the way of reflectivity, the way we, for example, we have a very deep understanding of things like maximum entropy methods or causality in Bayesian networks. So reflectivity, solve it. Then you can do self-modification.
One of the things that galvanized me was right at the start of the day when Ray talked about how the fact that there were 3.6 million pictures of cats and 300 million pictures of dogs was a great boon to AI researchers. I think that, you know, if you contribute to the pool of human knowledge that's available freely and can be machine read on the internet, the worst case scenario is that you improve the pool of human knowledge, and the best case scenario is that some scholar or practitioner working on fields as diverse as natural language processing, teaching vision systems to distinguish between different objects, or even linguists who do things like build and track a corpus of how the use of language has changed year on year. I contribute all of my writing to something called the Canadian English Project that has an American and a British equivalent that looks just at word frequency patterns over years in different forms of spoken English. That's the worst case scenario, is you end up enhancing all these different disciplines, and the best case scenario is some AI researcher uses it.
Well, I mean, I would.
That had nothing to do with the DMCA. What to do about the DMCA? Join EFF.
That's call to action. I'm looking for specific things from panel. Your topic is, you know, what specifically you want us to change in the world, for example, DCMA to being what instead?
Oh, well, okay. So Rick Boucher's DMCRA, which is the, which I can't remember what it stands for. It's the Digital Something Reform Copyright Act. Rick Boucher's DMCRA. Pass it, and you'd get an outcome that would allow for competition while allowing for a certain amount of control over technology, a much more balanced version. The Eric Eldred Act, which would cap copyrights at 50 years unless the author took a positive step to renew it for 10 more years and 10 again.
Copyrights have decreasing lengths.
Uh-huh.
Right? Can you suggest any higher level way to measure when intellectual property should be worked?
Sure. There's a document called the Adelphi Charter that I co-authored along with people like Sir John Sulston, who helped sequence the human genome and got the Nobel Prize, that actually goes into a great deal of detail about how to evaluate when an exclusive right is correct or not correct to impose, and you'll find that if you Google Adelphi Charter.
I think it's like Delphi with an A in front of it.
PHI, ADELPHI.
I'd like to suggest that if we take our network seriously, then we're building that collective NLP AI step by step. If we annotate it, if we meta tag it, if we put the information out there, if we buy the $80 a month, EVDO 3G modem, so I'm Googling and talking to the Oracle while I'm sitting here all day, right? That's going to be $60 a month next year. And if we vote with our pocketbooks, we're going to create, if we adopt the technologies that work, we're going to create much faster the kind of world that we want to have. I don't want to have this thing on my lap. I want it on my arm. Where the heck is my little gauntlet computer, right? I mean, it sucks, right? You make it by adopting, by driving the technology and taking the network seriously. Google knows near, coffee shops near Palo Alto. So, step by step it learns these things, and if you learn how to use them, you make it smarter.
Well, that's why Google works well, because it harnesses the wisdom of crowds, and they don't have their librarian saying, okay, when someone searches for nanotechnology, we're going to put Foresight Institute first. I think it probably comes up first anyway, but that's the wisdom of crowds. Everybody contributes to that. If this discussion today had seemed diverse and touching a lot of topics, from religion to copyrights to natural language and so on, that's because this is a complex subject that touches all of these issues, which is why I think people can contribute in many different ways. All 50,000 researchers in brain science are contributing to this, whether they realize it or not, and that's just one field that's relevant.
Let's I think we have to we can keep it, we can definitely have some more people come up and talk to the panelists one-on-one. I realize we couldn't get to everybody's questions and so on. We haven't necessarily solved the question of when computers will think like humans. To thank the entire panel for at least getting the humans in this audience to think for one day, which is not an entirely insignificant achievement. Thank you very much.